Hi everyone, State Senator Kevin Witkos. Welcome back to another edition of my Veterans Corner. I'm so proud and pleased to be with Major Leah Ward from the Connecticut Air National Guard. Leah, congratulations on being named the Veteran of the Month.
Thank you.
And welcome me to your lovely home and your service to your state and to your country. That's fantastic.
Well, I was always on the winning end of all of that. I really believe that. I think I always got more out of my service than maybe they got for me. So I hope I can serve a little more in the future to pay back all the wonderful benefits and experiences that I've gotten over the years.
And you're still serving now in the Air National Guard?
I am. It's been 22 years. I was considering retiring, but I'm currently in school right now for APRN, so I think what I might do is go inactive for a couple of years and finish that and then decide on a unit after that, after I complete
Sure.
my education.
Well, if you've been in there for 22 years, if we did our math correctly, I think the draft was no longer functioning at the time. So
No.
you made the decision on your own to join the United States military service, correct?
Correct.
And what made you do that? Did you have a family member that served, or you just felt that was something that you wanted to do?
Well, I was very young, and I have come to find out over the years that I have many veterans throughout the family tree, especially as I research our genealogy. But back then, at 18, I didn't really know other than my one grandfather, and I didn't get to talk to him that
Sure.
much. So I didn't have any immediate inspiration within the home or anybody to talk to. But I went away to college when I was 18, and I was pretty much on my own, though my family did help some. And I was struggling a lot, and so I decided to look into the Army Reserve program at that time. And just because, I was struggling, and I thought, well, if they could help me with college, that would be great.
Is that like the ROTC program?
It's different. ROTC is more of a college-based thing where you get a commission upon graduation, and you complete
Okay.
all your training while you're in college.
Mm-hmm.
I just looked into enlisting in the reserves,
Oh, okay.
and I found that they had a need for medical, of course, and that they would provide good training to be a medic, and that was exciting to me because I was in nursing school at the time. And so it seemed good, and I had a sense of adventure, so I thought, well, this is going to be interesting, and I'm excited about it. And somehow or another that turned into 22 years, and I've loved every minute. I think that I was really blessed
Sure.
to do everything that I got to do, and the people that I met so many wonderful individuals over the years. It was very inspiring. I feel very lucky.
Well, oftentimes, you're saying that you were joining or interested in joining when you were just 18 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people at that age don't really know what they want to do when they grow up or for a living. And it seems to me that you had this intuition or that you wanted to get into nursing, and that's what you're doing today. How did you have something in your early childhood that says, I think I want to be a nurse?
I decided when I was 13 that I wanted to be a nurse. Part of it was a suggestion by my mom, but I thought about it, and I thought it sounded like a really good idea. It's hard to say what could go through the mind of a 13-year-old
Sure.
that would affect the rest of their life. But somehow or another, I stuck to that idea and kept going with it, and that's what I'm doing today. And I hardly meet anybody that I work with that is a nurse that went to school as a traditional 18-year-old student, as most of them did this later in life when they already had a family or had other careers previously. That pretty much describes everybody that I work with. So it was a good thing, though, that I did get it out of the way early and got a bachelor's degree by the time I was 23. But I hardly meet any of those traditional type students that started out on that path so
Right.
early.
So how did that work? So when you decided that you wanted to join the Army Reserve, was that a weekend thing so you could continue on with school?
Right, yes. A weekend a month, the 2-week training, which was usually in the summer, but not always. And then they would have additional training opportunities that might come up in schools, and sometimes an active duty thing that they needed help with. But it allowed me to go to school and still serve and learn a lot about
Sure.
the nation's defense and how we played into that. It was the Clinton era, though, so things were drastically different, I think, than they are. Even though that wasn't so long ago, it is really amazing how different things are now. Everyone's train of thought has changed about our national defense. Things are more serious now, and there's more funding. And
Sure.
it's
We
just
talked a
lot
little bit
different.
earlier about when you joined the service. It was in 1993.
Yes.
And so we had completed the under President Bush, the first Bush, the Gulf War, and it was in 1991, I believe, and that
Yes.
had concluded. So at that time, what was happening in world affairs? I jog my memory. Were we at peace all the way around? You didn't have to do any deployments at that time. Did
No,
you?
I was in high school when all that was going on, watching the news as much as I could. I was very interested in that. But it had pretty much wrapped up by the time I went in 1993. So there wasn't, I mean, there was probably still some presence in the Middle East, but it wasn't very much. And the Clinton era marked a period in our history where everything was being cut as drastically as it could be. And I remember being at work one day, and we were talking about upcoming election, and I mentioned something about, but this candidate really wants to cut funding to the military. And I remember a coworker saying, well, why do we need to fund the military? And she was serious. And that was kind of the thinking then. We just need to cut everything to bare bones. We need to save all the money we can. In a lot of ways, that decimated the military and their capabilities. So by the time the Clinton era was over, there was a lot of catching up to do. But that's very cyclical.
Sure.
That happens all the time.
Right.
You finish one conflict, everybody's tired of spending money, you cut it, and then they backtrack a little bit when they realize that we might be in trouble. So
We all know, even though if we're at peace, we still need a military to protect what we have.
yes,
And we're a nation that people look towards to making sure that we protect democracy around the globe as well. So I understand that you actually were involved in some deployments. How did that? Were you you went through school, you got your bachelor's, became a nurse,
yes.
and then were you working in a civilian hospital? Did you work on a base? If you're in your role in the military, did you use your skills as a nurse as your function? Tell me a little bit about how that works.
I finished college in 1998, and I didn't take a commission right away. I waited a few years, and I also switched over to the Air Force Reserves after my contract was completed with the Army Reserves, because they had a lot of different opportunities that I was really interested in. And so I switched over. I really loved it. I never regretted doing that. And shortly after I had switched, then I was able to take a commission and actually be a nurse and a second lieutenant in the Air Force, whereas prior to that I was still a med tech, even though I had a nursing degree.
So how does that work? I've never heard that before. So you have to take a commission to perform a certain function in the military?
Well, once you get your degree, it's quite different for medical chaplains, lawyers. They can get what's called a direct commission, where they, as long as they're selected and there's no problems with their paperwork, they can be selected and go away to school, and they'll give them their commission as soon as they're selected, and then they go away to school. For the other disciplines in this world, people that work in admin or all different areas, it's a little harder on them because they have to go through a harder school, prove themselves, and then if they're lucky, then they get their commission. So they try to make it a little nicer for medical chaplains, lawyers, just because those are a little bit harder to recruit and retain long term.
When you
So
mean
that's the
commission, does
difference.
that mean job and rank, or just
The
job?
commissioned officers the commissioned services, or those are your officers, second
Okay.
lieutenant through general. So that's what that means, is that you're becoming an officer, you're taking an oath, you're going for advanced training, and you have the right degree in that field.
So you got your commission
Yes.
in the Air Force Reserve, and so what was your day like when you went to serve in the reserves? What was your typical day like?
Well, a typical month, you're only there for that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
You may go up during the month to take care of other things, depending on what needs to get done. And you may go away for training in schools. But, that's your typical year. There's a couple weeks of annual training. But in the last 10 years, there's been a lot going on in the world, and so they've needed the reserves to provide backfill for active duty, but also to deploy all over the world, overseas. There's been a lot of opportunities all over the place, and I was able to take care of or take advantage of those opportunities twice. The first time was in 2004. Our unit was asked to go to Kuwait because Kuwait is tiny and it was only 50 miles from the Iraqi border, so it was an easy place where they could send a lot of patients to Kuwait from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they would free up room in Germany because at that time Germany, the hospital at Landstuhl was overfull, just overflowing with patients.
Is that a military base where
Yes.
the hospital was? Okay.
Yeah, and the Army, all services were evacuating their patients to Germany, but it didn't take long until the hospital filled up. So then we had a facility in Kuwait that could take certain types of illnesses and injuries and free up some room in Germany so that, that would help them out a little bit.
Sure.
And so they were sending us patients every day that had non-life-threatening injuries. A few of them were bordering on life-threatening, but if they became unstable, we would get them out of there pretty quickly. But for the most part, they were fairly stable, but they needed people to process them through the AirVac system, make sure they had all their documentation and paperwork, medications, and monitor them and make sure that they got where they needed to go. Mm-hmm. And that's what we were doing, and they would fly more patients into us every day.
Now, being in a Middle Eastern country, was the hospitals similar to what we would see back here in Western civilization as far as technology? Or I know we would probably bring our own stuff, but when you first walked in, were you kind of shocked that either it looks like a hospital in Main City, USA, or not?
No, it wasn't like that at all. The base, the Kuwaitis have been very friendly to us because we helped them out just not that many years before. And so they gave us a part of their base at Ali Al Salim in Kuwait to use as we needed for, support of the conflicts that were in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so everything went up overnight, and it was a tent city, and they had trailers set up. But most of the structures at that time were just very, just quickly put up. They were meant to be temporary. Some years after I left, however, they wound up building a hardened facility for medical because they realized that they were going to be needing this for years and that we weren't just going to be in and out of there in a short time. So, but when I was there, our facility was still in tents, and we made do with that. That was fine. But they went on to put a lot more hardened facilities there some years later. So we were working in tents. It was not at all like here.
People, hard to believe that you could run a hospital out of a tent.
Well, they're really beautiful, and they're not like what you think of as a tent. They all have metal framework, air conditioning,
They're
heating
not like MASH
systems.
4077.
No, well, much fancier. They have flooring on the bottom. The only thing is they're not real great if it floods, and there's in the winter time they can get some flooding there if it rains. It hardly rains, but the month or two that it does rain, occasionally you'll get some flooding because the ground is so hard it doesn't absorb much of the water very quickly. So we had problems in the middle of the winter, but and then I also was living in a tent, and it was a similar type of setup, metal framework and a flooring, and we had air conditioning.
Were you separated by your work units or by branch of service, or were you with the other nurses? Or what was your living?
I was the youngest.
Right?
I was the youngest lieutenant, so they wound up just putting me in a tent with a bunch of enlisted, but most of the other officers were in 2-man rooms, and those were hardened facilities. But I was the exception. I was sort of like the odd number and the youngest, and so I went to stay in the tents. But that was okay. I thought it was perfectly fine, And I worked night shift, so it was usually pretty quiet during the day most of the time. So it was fine for as much time as you spend in there.
And how long was your deployment for?
That one was on the short side. 4.5 months we were in country, plus a few weeks before and after to get ready, and then, wrap things up at the end. So it wasn't real long, not really. Not like the Army that's gone for a year and a half at a time.
And is that a volunteer deployment, or do they say we're in need of medical staff, doctors, nurses, technicians, and your unit, you're going? How does that work?
For medical, it was a little different because we had a lot of medical personnel that really wanted these opportunities, so it could be like a volunteer opportunity. And I was excited to go and happy to volunteer for that. But other disciplines, maybe not, it wouldn't have been a volunteer thing. They always, in the past 10 years, seem to have enough medical who are happy and excited to go to where they usually didn't wind up having to make people go that weren't able or, couldn't at that time. So they would just send a tasking to our unit and they'd say, these are the numbers that we need, provide us who you can. And if it's not enough, then they would pull from other units who would also provide volunteers that could go.
So in Connecticut, at the Air National Guard, that's Air Force.
Right.
How many different units do they have? I mean, you're in a medical unit. I mean, how many are there of you?
Well, the deployments that I did were when I was in the Air Force Reserves. And then I was nearing retirement. I decided to switch over to the Connecticut Air National Guard, which was much closer. And
let's take it back to the Air Force
Reserves.
So how does that work? So if you're a member of the Air Force Reserves, are you grouped by your trade?
Yes. I was in an aeromedical staging squadron. They actually had 3 different medical units at Westover. The Guard just has one clinic that provides all the base medical services, but it's a larger base, and they had specialty units that worked in different parts of the air evac system. So there were 3 different medical units, and each one specialized in a different part of medical air evacuation. And one of them was a clinic who provided the base medical services for us. The other one was an air evac unit that actually would fly with the patients and provide their medical care in flight. And we were a staging squadron who would set up and run the facilities on the ground where these planes would have to stop and give us patients to either send on another flight or just take care of for however long until the next plane was taking off.
And I know where we live, you happen to see the C-5s fly over to Westover Air Force Base. And is that the transport that you took when you went over to Kuwait?
No, back then they had, for a long time they had rotators that were owned by the civilian airlines, and they would just regularly be going back and forth to the Middle East and to Germany and dropping people off. But it sort of depended where you were going to, because if you were going to a more remote area in Iraq, they're not going to take a civilian airliner into that area.
Sure.
So you would just fly to somewhere centrally located, and then they would fly you in a cargo plane or whatever was available, a chopper. But for us, it was the civilian airline rotators that went back and forth all the time during the whole 10 years.
So after the Air Force, you still wanted to serve, but something a little closer to home? So
closer to home, and everybody that I had known at my unit and deployed with, they had all retired or moved on. So it just seemed like a good point because I didn't know anybody anymore. So it just seemed like a good stopping point to transition to Connecticut.
Well, from all the veterans I've spoken with, your servicemen and women are brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And it's certainly when your family leaves, it's hard, but you've done such a great job, and you're so devoted to your work and to your country that I applaud you for going on now serving in the Connecticut Air National Guard. What do you do as a member of the Connecticut Air National Guard?
I'm also still a nurse, a clinical nurse, but this time it's been more education and training role where I'm preparing lesson plans and teaching the med techs and preparing a training plan for the year and coming up with things for them to study and learn and setting things up like that. So it's been different. I enjoyed that, though. That was the good part of the job.
Fantastic. And congratulations on your promotion to major.
Well, that was a while ago. That actually happened as I was leaving for Germany, right just before I left for Germany in 2010.
And what were you doing in Germany? Was that another deployment?
That was the second one. It was similar, but we were in a hardened facility, and they would send us patients every day, and we would either send them over to the hospital, or some of them we would keep in our facility until they were getting, till the next plane came to take them back to the U.S. for treatment, and then some were there waiting to return to Iraq or Afghanistan, waiting for a ride back. So it was just kind of like a medical bus stop, if you will.
Sure. Well, I know at the beginning of the interview you said that you didn't have an immediate family member that inspired you to be in the military. A grandparent was a member, but I understand your husband is a Marine Corps
Yes.
veteran. So both you and your husband are great inspirations for your children, a great military family. And Leah, one of the things we like to do when we conclude our interviews is allow the veteran the opportunity to send a message out to other veterans that may be watching, or current servicemen or past servicemen and women that like to tune in every month and see who's being showcased on the Veterans Corner. So I'd like to offer you that opportunity at this time.
Well, as a nurse, I always felt extremely lucky and privileged to take care of folks that sustained injuries or illnesses, PTSD, during the course of their service. That was very humbling, and it was something that I absolutely loved to do. Many of those folks were extremely inspiring to meet. So if you're someone like that who has suffered an injury as a result of your service, then God bless you. And you need to know how lucky I always felt to be able to look after folks that were in that boat and in that situation.
And I'm sure those folks that are in that situation and were in that situation were lucky to have a nurse such as yourself by their bedside, helping them get through these difficult times.
I like to think that I tried to do the best that I could for them. Often we didn't get to see them for that long because they were on their way pretty quickly. But I really did love what I did, and I did try to put my all into it. So.
An angel's touch can be very quick. It doesn't have to be long. So thank you. I'd like to thank Major Ward for appearing this month on Senator Witkos' Veterans Corner. And tune in next month as we revisit the next veteran on Veterans Corner. That's all for now.